Hi, Y, welcome back to TV Spoilers. Today I'm going to reveal to you the drama of Paul's show. Meanwhile, Jack has the chance of their father-son relationship.
Young and the Restless reveal that the Abbott name has always carried an unspoken promise in Genoa City: stability, legacy, and the belief that family business is more than profited is identity. But lately, that promise has begun to rot from the inside. The shutdown bruised Jabot in ways the public will never fully understand, and even though the company is reopening its doors, the damage is still echoing through every floor, every budget line, every anxious meeting that lasts so long because nobody wants to be the one to admit how fragile things have become. Jack has been living in that fragility for months, forcing calm into his voice while the numbers tried to scream. And he has leaned on the one person he thought would never turn that pressure into a weapon: Kyle. Together, they fought for Jabot's survival, sold confidence to investors, reassured employees, and convinced themselves the worst was behind them. They shared victories that felt like proof the Abbott bond could outlast anything. That is exactly why the shift in Kyle's behavior lands like a betrayal Jack cannot simply rationalize away as business. At first, Jack tells himself he's imagining it. Kyle has always been ambitious. That was never the problem. Jack even admired it because Kyle's drive was supposed to be the engine that helped rebuild Jabot, not the blade aimed at Jack's back. Yet small signs begin to stack up into something heavier. Kyle making calls without looping him in. Kyle holding side conversations after meetings end. Kyle speaking about the next phase with a tone that subtly removes Jack from the picture. Nothing is explicit, nothing Jack can point to without looking paranoid. But Jack knows Kyle's rhythms the way a father knows his child's silence, and Kyle's silence now has intention. Jack starts to feel that the rebuilding of Jabot is being used as a cover story and excuse for necessary restructuring. A convenient narrative to justify changes that are not about efficiency at all, but about control. The deeper Jack looks, the more it hurts. Because it isn't just Kyle taking initiative, it's Kyle collecting leverage. Kyle's moves are disciplined, methodical, and strangely insulated from Jack's influence, as if Kyle has built a parallel version of Jabot's leadership that does not require Jack's approval. Jack begins to recognize a pattern: Kyle positioning himself as the unavoidable solution to every problem, quietly presenting himself as the only leader modern enough, sharp enough, and fearless enough to keep Jabot from slipping again. In another time, Jack might have been proud of that hunger. Now it feels like a rewrite of history, as if everything Jack endured to protect the company is being reframed as old leadership that needs to step aside. Jack is forced to confront something he never wanted to name. Kyle doesn't just want a seat at the table, Kyle wants the head of it, and he wants it now, not someday. And then comes the moment that changes Jack's internal doubt into certainty. Jack discovers that Kyle has been building alliances in secret alliances that are not merely networking, but strategic positioning. Kyle is talking to people Jack believed were firmly in the past, including those who have clashed with the Abbotts before. And Kyle is doing it with the kind of careful patience that implies he has been planning this longer than Jack suspected. Jack can't escape the sting of it. Kyle didn't trust him enough to be honest, but trusted outsiders enough to help him strengthen his personal claim. It makes Jack question every recent conversation between them, every victory they celebrated, every reassurance Kyle offered about being a team. Jack feels the ground shift beneath his feet. Because what frightens him most is not simply that Kyle is ambitious, it's that Kyle is willing to treat the father-son bond like a weakness that can be exploited. Jack's anger doesn't arrive as a theatrical explosion. It arrives as something colder and more dangerous. It's the anger of a man who realizes he has been smiling for photos while the person beside him has been measuring the room for an exit that leaves Jack behind. Jack has spent his life defending the Abbott legacy from external threats, competitors, corporate predators, and the endless political games of Genoa City's elite. But an attack from within, from his own son, lands differently. This isn't just a professional challenge. It threatens Jack's identity as a father, as a mentor, as the man who believed he could pass the torch without being burned by it. Jack starts to spiral through questions he never expected to ask. Did Kyle always resent him? Did Kyle ever truly respect him? Or was Jack simply convenient until Kyle was ready to replace him? Kyle, meanwhile, is not stumbling through this. He has convinced himself this is not betrayal, it is evolution. In Kyle's mind, Jabot cannot be rebuilt with nostalgia and sentimental loyalty. The shutdown exposed weaknesses, and weakness is blood in the water in Genoa City. Kyle sees the world changing faster than the Abbotts have been willing to admit. And he believes Jabot needs a different kind of leadership, one that makes decisions without the weight of history on its shoulders. What makes Kyle terrifying is that his argument can sound reasonable on the surface. He isn't claiming Jack is incompetent. He is implying Jack is no longer the right fit for the next war. Kyle can even tell himself he is saving the family business, saving the Abbott name, doing what Jack would have done if Jack were younger, sharper, less emotionally entangled. That self-justification is what hardens Kyle's spine. He isn't acting like a reckless son. He is acting like a successor who believes time is a luxury Jabot doesn't have. When Jack finally confronts Kyle, when Jack stops pretending this is nothing, the air between them turns heavy with everything unsaid. Jack demands honesty, not as a CEO but as a father who refuses to be lied to by his own child. Kyle doesn't dodge. Kyle admits his ambition with a bluntness that feels like a slap. He believes Jabot needs a leadership change to become stronger, more competitive, more ruthless in a world that won't wait for Jack's careful principles. Kyle frames it as necessity, not cruelty. But necessity doesn't soothe Jack. It only clarifies the reality. Kyle has already decided Jack is the obstacle. And once Jack sees that, he realizes pleading for loyalty would only weaken him. If Kyle is willing to move against him, Jack must be willing to move back, even if it tears their family apart. Jack's internal conflict becomes brutal. The man who loves his son wants to reach for compromise, wants to believe there is a way to guide Kyle without destroying him. But the leader in Jack cannot ignore the threat, because Jabot is not a toy passed between generations. It is a living machine that supports real people, real livelihoods, and the Abbott legacy itself. Jack knows that if Kyle succeeds through secret alliances and behind-the-scenes maneuvering, it sets a precedent that could poison Jabot's culture forever. Jack also knows that if he hesitates, Kyle will interpret it as weakness and press harder. So Jack does what he has always done when cornered. He becomes strategic. He begins to map at every pressure point, every policy lever, every relationship that still belongs to Jack. He stops thinking like a father and starts thinking like a commander preparing for a battle he never wanted. The tragedy is that Jack understands Kyle because Kyle learned this mindset from him. Jack taught Kyle how power works, how perception matters, how alliances shape outcomes, how leadership is as much about what people believe as what is true. Now Kyle is using those lessons against him. That realization makes Jack's determination even darker, because it carries guilt along with it. If Kyle has become capable of this kind of quiet coup, then Jack helped create the very threat that could dismantle everything he built. Jack doesn't have the luxury to grieve that truth. He has to act. So Jack begins to plan a counterstrike, not fueled by rage alone, but by a disciplined fear that Kyle's ambition could fracture Jabot at the worst possible time. Jack is careful. He keeps his face neutral in meetings, refuses to let Kyle see panic, and starts collecting his own pieces on the board. He prepares for a fight where the winner won't simply earn a title, but will decide what the Abbott name means going forward. And as Jack lays out his strategy, he forces himself to accept the most painful reality of all. This is no longer just a disagreement between a father and son. This is a power war, and the person across from him is no longer only Kyle. He is an opponent who knows Jack's vulnerabilities better than anyone alive. By the time Jack is done recalibrating, he realizes something chilling. Kyle isn't merely trying to take a position. Kyle is trying to rewrite the Abbott hierarchy itself, to make Jack the past and Kyle the future, publicly and permanently. Jack cannot allow that to happen, not because he is addicted to control, but because he believes the legacy is bigger than either of them. And Kyle's method of seizing it could destroy the very foundation he claims to protect. Jack steels himself for the next move, prepared to be ruthless if he must be, prepared to sacrifice peace for stability. But just as Jack convinces himself he's ready, he receives a fresh sign, small, almost invisible to anyone else, that Kyle's secret alliances are closer to becoming action than Jack realized. And that the first official move to force Jack out may already be in motion, leaving Jack with one terrifying question as the door closes behind him. When the next Jabot meeting begins, will he still be the man in charge? Or will he walk in and discover his own son has already taken his throne? There are moments in Genoa City when a power move isn't launched to win instantly, but to create the illusion that the people behind it already hold the future in their hands. Jack and Kyle understand that better than anyone. After a prolonged stretch of instability that left Jabot bruised and exposed, they entered a phase where every decision had to do three things at once: stabilize the business, calm the market, and protect the Abbott name from the quiet sense of decay that can spread through a company when confidence begins to thin. So when whispers of a joint power move started circulating, it wasn't just strategy, it was a declaration that Jabot was still standing, and the Abbotts were still steering. In the moment before they executed it, Jack and Kyle looked like two edges of the same blade, one tempered by experience and survival, the other sharpened by ambition and speed. They believed that if they struck together, they could force the entire city to look at Jabot differently. But that very confidence became a fragile cover for a deeper risk. When two leaders reach for power at the same time, the line of responsibility blurs, and a single miscalculation can turn into a fracture that refuses to heal. The plan was nurtured like a proud act of rebuilding. Everything was prepared with care. Numbers arranged to reassure, messaging weighed word by word, steps timed to create a chain reaction of renewed belief. Jack saw Jabot as a body still recovering from a long illness, and he believed this bold pivot would pump life back into employees and partners alike. Kyle, on the other hand, saw Jabot as a ship slowed by tradition and habit. To him, this was the moment to prove that speed and decisiveness were the real cure. That endless caution would only guarantee Jabot got overtaken, while the Abbotts congratulated themselves on old victories. Both men stepped into the move with the same surface goal advantage for Jabot, but beneath that shared purpose sat two private engines. Jack wanted to defend leadership and stability the way he always had. Kyle wanted to prove the future belonged to him, that he was no longer the son standing beside his father, but the man capable of defining a new era. Then the consequences hit in a way that made explanations feel useless. It wasn't an obvious error, not a clean fall with a single clear culprit. It was the kind of side effect power creates. Once the move went public, it triggered reactions neither of them had timed correctly. The market didn't respond the way they'd predicted. Partners once considered safe began to hesitate. Numbers that were meant to be armor became fuel for suspicion. Instead of lifting Jabot's reputation into daylight, the move pushed it into another fog bank. Rumors about risk, about haste, about a family trying to project strength while accidentally revealing division. The financial impact wasn't just a dip on paper. It was the far more expensive loss of trust. And in Genoa City, when trust trembles, people don't wait for your explanation, they wait for your collapse. Inside the boardroom, the air turned thick, as if the walls themselves were listening. Jack could feel the careful glances, the cautious questions, the silence that fell in the wrong places. The way people avoided looking too directly at father and son, as if staring too hard might widen the crack that had just appeared beneath Jabot's polished surface. The shock wasn't only the damage. It was the sense of losing control. Jack had survived failure before, but he always believed he understood where it came from. This time, it felt like a shadow without shape, and that made him both furious and unsettled. In that state, his instincts reached for an anchor, something to pin the chaos to, something that could turn a messy disaster into a story with a clear fault line. Kyle, with his youth, his urgency, and his appetite for bold choices, became the easiest target. Jack's disappointment wasn't merely ill watching his company take a hit. It was a father feeling as if his trust had been misplaced. He looked at Kyle and saw impatience, bravado, the belief that a strong enough punch would force the world to step back. He didn't need to say it out loud. In his mind, Kyle had dragged them into a pace that was too fast, a speed that didn't allow risk to be examined properly. A rhythm that treated worst-case scenarios as pessimism instead of warning. Jack told himself that if Kyle had slowed down, if Kyle had listened, if Kyle had put Jabot above the need to prove himself, they wouldn't be standing here now. That anger carried the color of pain, the pain of a man who had fought beside his son, believed they were becoming a united front, and suddenly realized that unity might have existed only as long as success was guaranteed. But Kyle refused to be turned into a scapegoat. He didn't see youthful recklessness in what happened. He saw an old system resisting change, a leadership style built on habit and history. A kind of authority that hadn't been challenged in so long it had started to mistake experience for certainty. In Kyle's mind, if anyone was blind to risk, it was Jack, because Jack believed his instincts could predict every variable. Kyle felt insulted by the familiar narrative Jack tried to impose. Kyle is still learning. Kyle is still green. Kyle had put his own name on that move, stepped into the spotlight beside Jack, shared responsibility openly, and the moment darkness arrived, Jack was the first to shove him forward. Kyle's pushback wasn't only ego. It was the reaction of someone who believed he'd been pulled into a game whose rules were still written by Jack, where the younger man takes the hit when things go wrong. Trust began to fall away in sharp little pieces, not loudly, but dangerously. Jack felt Kyle was using the failure as a justification for ambition, turning we miscalculated into Jack is the problem because Jack won't change. Kyle felt Jack was clinging to power by treating every bold step as a sin of youth, labeling speed as recklessness, even though Jack himself had once been daring when he was younger. What made the conflict so volatile was that both of them had a piece of the truth, and that made it harder for either one to step back. The more Jack tightened his grip, the more Kyle believed Jack would never truly hand over the future. The more Kyle resisted, the more Jack believed his son was willing to crack the foundation just to seize the top seat. Their partnership didn't explode in one dramatic moment. It iced over in the way they started making decisions. Conversations shortened. Meetings turned into arenas for quiet competition. Faced with the same problem, Jack and Kyle offered opposite instincts. One wanted to repair trust through stability. The other wanted to counterattack through bigger change to prove they were still in control. And the worst part was that Jabot could feel that split. The company wasn't only dealing with financial damage or reputational bruises. It was confronting a question that eats organizations alive. Who is truly in charge? When leadership divides, employees start choosing sides even if they never admit it. And once factions form, every decision becomes suspect. Every strategy gets dissected, and Jabot turns into a battlefield inside its own walls. Billy watched the tension from the outside with the quiet focus of someone who can recognize a storm while it's still gathering. He didn't need to interfere to make things worse. Jack and Kyle's conflict had enough force on its own. Billy understood the Abbott family in ways most people never could. How they loved through control, how they wound each other through pride, how power turns blood ties into bargaining chips. He studied Jack's eyes as Jack clung to discipline like a lifeline. He studied Kyle's posture as confidence tried to hide a colder fear. If this failure became permanently attached to his name, the future he was fighting for could collapse before it truly began. Billy's calculations weren't necessarily sabotage, they were survival. He knew that when the two central leaders pull apart, a vacuum forms, and vacuums always tempt the person willing to step into them. Jabot's future became unstable in the most dangerous way quietly. On the outside, the company still functioned, meetings happened, memos went out, statements were crafted to sound normal. But inside, everything felt like glass that had just begun to crack. From far away it looked intact, but up close the fractures were spreading. Jack started mapping moves to protect the legacy, yet every move carried the dread that he was protecting it from his own son. Kyle started imagining a new direction, yet every idea was shadowed by Jack's presence, a reminder that real authority still wasn't fully his. And Billy, standing in the middle, could sense the moment the Abbott family's pride and unity was turning into a question of who would still be standing once the dust settled. The most bitter truth was that both Jack and Kyle believed they were right. Jack believed that without discipline, Jabot would fall into chaos and the Abbott legacy would become a punchline. Kyle believed that without aggressive change, Jabot would die slowly, and Jack was only prolonging weakness with safe decisions. Those two convictions collided like stone, unwilling to yield, unwilling to soften. And the longer it went on, the more they transformed the original misstep into something larger, a power struggle over the company's future direction. It stopped being about how to fix what happened and became about who had the right to define what right even meant. Just when Jack and Kyle thought they could build a temporary wall, something to keep the company from panicking further, another sign appeared. Small, almost invisible, but heavy enough to pull Jack's stomach downward and send a chill through Kyle's spine. A second side effect began to surface from their joint moves, something neither of them had fully seen because they'd been too busy fighting over blame. This wasn't only about reputation or money anymore. It threatened to hit Jabot's power structure in a way that could not be contained. And in that precise moment, as Jack prepared the hardest decision of his life and Kyle prepared a bold step to reclaim control, Billy caught a clue that made one thing unmistakable. The real game was only beginning, and at the next Jabot meeting, a single unexpected reversal could force everyone to choose a side immediately. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.